Hello and welcome everybody. We're very excited to be here today to present a training for our protocol for conducting debris surveys in the Red River estuary. During this session, you will learn a little bit of background about marine debris and why it's an important issue. We'll go through the training of the protocol for conducting debris surveys in the Red River. And we'll do some practice of identifying common items that you might find while conducting your debris surveys. Before we get started, I want to share a little bit about myself. My name is Rachel Kusuma-Giles. I am a PhD student at the University of Toronto in Canada. My PhD supervisor pictured here is Dr. Chelsea Rockman, who was also instrumental in developing this protocol as well as preparing this training video for you. During this training, I encourage you to stop the video, rewind, and rewatch if there's anything that requires repeating or clarification. During the training session at the end, I'll also encourage you to stop the video, make your guess as to what object it is that you're observing, and then check to see what the answer is. I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of background information about why we are doing this research and our overall research goals. When we think of marine debris, we often think of these photographs. We know that hundreds, more than 600 species, interact with marine debris in some way or another. Organisms can interact with marine debris through ingestion or by eating it, like this whale, as well as entanglement, like this turtle. Organisms can also eat marine debris, which may pierce holes in their bowels or cause malnutrition when they confuse it for food. Marine debris impacts aquaculture directly through costs to clean up or by replacing lost materials, as well as indirectly by deterioration that ecosystems undergo when marine debris is found there. Marine debris impacts tourism through losses due to marine debris, as well as through the cost of cleanup. So for these reasons and more, it's important that we understand marine debris and reduce it in our oceans. We know that globally, debris and plastic in general comes from ocean-based or land-based sources. Ocean-based marine debris items are typically associated with fisheries activities and are lost at sea. These may include items such as fishing nets, buoys, ropes, gloves, and styrofoam containers. Land-based marine debris items are typically associated with human consumption and include a lot of single-use items. These include items such as plastic bags, food wrappers, cutlery, and more. The majority of litter comes from the land, either directly from coastal sites or through rivers. This project focuses on rivers as a source of debris to the ocean. According to a recent study, Southeast Asian rivers contribute a significant amount of debris to the oceans. So, studying anthropogenic debris in Vietnam is a great place for us to address this issue locally while having greater global impacts. Despite the fact that we know marine debris is an issue globally, anthropogenic marine debris research is really in its infancy in Vietnam. Despite there being significant work conducted in the south of Vietnam in the Mekong Delta on both macro and microplastics, little if not no research has been conducted within the Red River Delta to quantify litter and its ecological effects. Marine debris has been observed by locals and MCD officials in the Red River. Litter can be found washed up onto shore, as seen in the left here, into the tree line, as seen in the center photo here, or simply along the beach, as seen in the far right photo. According to MCD, the Center for Marine Life Conservation and Community Development, the amount of debris varies depending on the season and location. Community members in this area have also noticed a lot of litter within the park and have raised concern over this. Although this video is only training you on a small portion of our project, I want to share the entire project goals with you so you have an idea of our scope. Our objectives are to develop a method and use it to conduct a baseline study of anthropogenic debris along the Red River in Vietnam. Use the protocol developed in Objective 1 to quantify and characterize anthropogenic debris along the shorelines of the Red River in 3 locations upstream and downstream of future trash capture devices. Quantify and characterize floating anthropogenic debris flowing in the river from bridges to estimate plastic transport in the Red River. And lastly, quantify and characterize anthropogenic debris trapped in trash capture devices to measure the efficacy of the traps. For today's training, we're focusing on the training for Objectives 1 and 2. I'll also add that while we are talking about research in the Red River specifically, this protocol can be used and adapted for research in other rivers in Vietnam and worldwide. Additionally, I want to give you an overview of this protocol before we jump in. MCD will be installing river traps in several potential locations in the Red River estuary. These are marked with the red pointers. We will conduct debris surveys upstream and downstream of these traps to quantify how much debris is found upstream and downstream. Now, these spots are circled in yellow. The site ID codes are listed as the letters A through F. At each site, we will survey all marine debris, which includes items made of plastic, metal, glass, lumber, rubber, and cloth or fabric. We're conducting a standing stock survey, which means that we will not clean up the debris, but rather leave it in place. The survey transects, as pictured here, will be conducted along the shorelines. I also want to make a quick note about safety. This is really important for you to prepare before going out into the field. First of all, do not touch or lift any potentially hazardous or large, heavy items. If you do see items that you think could be heavy or hazardous, notify your local officials and leave those items in place. Hazardous items could include things like syringes, sharp glass, or objects that are too heavy to lift up. When near the water, take any necessary safety measures. This could mean simply not going close to the water or wearing personal protective equipment such as a life jacket. Wear proper PPE. This includes a life jacket, closed-toe shoes, long pants, and during COVID, a mask and gloves. Dress for the weather. So we recommend wearing a light long sleeve shirt to protect you from the sun, a hat, and sunscreen. Here are photographs of all of the materials you will need. Referring to the protocol, we've given you a photograph of everything so that you have an idea of what you're looking for. And most of these materials are available through online retailers such as Amazon. Here are some additional materials: labeling tape, hand sanitizer, first aid kit, clipboards, sunscreen, bug spray, permanent markers, and duct tape, stake flags, transect tape, a GPS, and extra batteries for the GPS, and a camera, work gloves and/or latex gloves, headlamps, and bags to hold your field equipment. One additional item that we took into the field with us were mud shoes. These were purchased in Vietnam and they're made out of fabric and cover the foot while walking in the mud of mangrove forests. It's likely that while you're conducting these surveys, the mud will not be very sticky, and so the mud shoes will not be necessary. Okay. So I'm going to go step by step in our protocol to go over what you'll need to do. The numbers in this presentation correspond to the numbers in the protocol. So the first step is to mark out your transect or shoreline site. To do this, You'll stretch out the transect tape as pictured here in the yellow box. Mark the 4 selected transect boundaries with stake flags as pictured here. Next, you'll record the GPS coordinates in the top left corner, or corner A, as seen here. A few things I want to note about this step. First, our transect is 25 meters by 5 meters. Previously, other protocols have longer transects, either 50 or 100 meters. So our transect is shorter. It's 25 by 5 meters. When laying out the transect, you want the long edge of the transect to be parallel to the water, as seen here. The high tide line, as pictured here with the red dots, should be located approximately in the center of your transect if it's possible. The high tide line is located where there's a collection of a lot of debris and should be fairly easy to spot. You may have to shorten the transect if you find that the shoreline ends, you enter private property, or if there is a lot of debris. If this happens, that's okay. Just make sure to record this on the datasheet. Now, this is a really important step because we need to know how much area was surveyed in order to calculate the amount of debris per meter squared. You can record this anywhere on the datasheet as long as it ends up on your datasheet. While setting up your transect, try to avoid stepping inside the transect so that you don't step or affect any of the litter that you'll be surveying. So while you're recording on your datasheet, I just want to orient you to what the datasheet looks like. I'm going to go through this quite thoroughly so that you can become familiar with it. And this is because the datasheet is the most important part of the project. This is where all of your data goes, and this is what we'll be analyzing in the future. These datasheets should be printed on waterproof paper. You want to bring extra datasheets into the field with you, as well as some additional blank waterproof paper in case you need to make any other notes. When you're recording data, we recommend that you have a site lead, which is one person that is responsible for making sure that the top of the datasheet is completely filled in. You only need to have one site lead record the top part of the data sheet for each site that is surveyed. Remember, if you shorten your transect, this must be recorded on the datasheet. So that should be the responsibility of the site lead. So this is the top of the datasheet that I'll go over how to fill in. The second step is to complete your datasheet, the top of your datasheet. So first you'll want to record your surveyor names. We have a pair in each section of the transect. Next, you'll record the date of your survey and try to write out the date of your survey with a month name followed by a day number and the year. When you arrive at the site, record your start time. Record your site ID, so that will be letters A through F. And then record your GPS coordinates of corner A, that's the top left corner, latitude and longitude. Depending on the month, you'll be marking down whether it's the wet season or the dry season. Have a look to record the current conditions, whether it's sunny, cloudy, or rainy. Note whether it's windy or calm, and the approximate direction of the wind. So this can be north, south, east, west, as well as northeast, northwest, southeast, or southwest. This can be approximate. Your next step is to take a picture of your transect and mark yes in your datasheet. I suggest taking a photo of your datasheet first to record which site you're at. Then, when you download your photos onto your computer later, you can easily sort them by site. You'll either want to record the file names of the photos that you take here or the number of photos that you took. When photographing your transect, you can take multiple photos of the transect. Here, You can see that the researcher walked along the long edge of the transect, taking photos to ensure that every corner of the transect were photographs. Note that in this photograph, our transect was 50 meters long, so you may choose to have fewer photographs as long as you can capture the entire transect. Okay, now you're ready for the surveys. To begin your surveys, you'll first divide the transect into 3 sections. Ideally, you would have a team of 6 people with 3 pairs, each responsible for 1/3 of the transect. If you don't have a team of 6 researchers, that's fine. You can divide the transect into larger pieces or have pairs do multiple sections of your transect. In each pair, one person will be the recorder and one person will hold the datasheet. The person being the surveyor will walk in an S shape and call out to the recorder to let them know all of the debris items that they encounter over 2.5 centimeters in the longest dimension. This is about the size of a bottle cap. The surveyor should call out both the item type and the item material type in accordance with the datasheet. For example, you would say plastic rope and net pieces. The item name is rope and net, and the material type is plastic. Remember that as the surveyor goes along the transect, they should leave the debris in place because we're doing a standing stock survey. So we'll have each person walk in an S shape, recording all of the items that they've seen. The surveyor should only count the debris that's visible to the eye. So you may have to use your hands to move things aside if there are large clumps of debris that need to be taken apart. However, you should not dig down into the sand or mud to look for additional debris. We really want to be surveying only what we see along the surface of the shoreline. Once all 3 pairs have finished walking, you should have covered all areas of your transect. Now remember that if you cut your transect shorter than 25 meters, this should be recorded somewhere on your data sheet. That's how you do the actual debris surveys. Now I'm going to go through the data sheet to show you pictures of items that you'll encounter during your surveys. Fragments are items that are unidentifiable. So these are items that are broken down from a larger object. They're usually broken down so hard that you're not able to identify what item they were previously. Hard fragments look like this and are inflexible, stiff, and the edges are often jagged. Foam fragments are soft to the touch. Think of styrofoam. They're often very light. Film fragments usually come from things like bags and food wrappers, so they're quite flexible, thin, and can be a little bit stretchy. Food wrappers are items that we have wrapped in foods, so think about ramen wrappers or granola bars. Beverage bottles are specifically for beverages such as water or soda or juice. Any other bottles that are used for anything except a beverage are considered other jugs or containers. So this could be cleaning products, it could be oil for a car, anything like that. Cigar tips look like this. We also have cigarettes, disposable cigarette lighters, 6-pack rings, plastic bags. Plastic bags sometimes have sediment inside of them, and so they often get a little bit buried in the sand or mud. Plastic rope and net pieces. Buoys and floats, which are very diverse. You have some buoys and floats that are as large as my head and some that are very small like this. Fishing lures and lines. We also have polystyrene and foamed plastic cups, disposable masks, plastic utensils, drinking straws, Mylar balloons. So these are the balloons that have a sort of aluminum metallic-y sort of look. When they're new, they look like this image on the bottom. And once they've been in the environment for a while, they look more like this image above it. Personal care products include almost any item that you would normally find in your bathroom. So this includes things like toothbrushes, combs, syringes, and menstrual products. Rice bags were common in many of our sites. When they're together and relatively new in the environment, they tend to look like this photo above. And once they've been in the environment for a longer period of time, they sort of shred and break down into scraps like this. When it comes to metal items, you might see aluminum tin cans, aerosol cans, metal fragments. And again, fragments are anything that are broken down so that we aren't able to identify what item they previously belonged to. So they can be very diverse in what they look like. When it comes to glass items, you might see beverage bottles. So think about liquor glass bottles, jars, glass fragments, which come in a variety of shapes, colors, and sizes, and ceramic pieces. Ceramic pieces were quite common in some of our sites. So imagine if you took a ceramic plate and smashed it, that's what these ceramic pieces would look like. When it comes to rubber items, you might see flip-flops, fishing gloves. So these are thicker rubber gloves. You might also see latex gloves. So think about the gloves that we are seeing more of as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Tires, which may or may not have their rim inside of them. Latex balloons, so sort of more traditional balloons. And rubber fragments. I want to remind you that rubber is not always black. It tends to be black, but you can see some other rubber items, such as this rubber boot. And so when we're looking at rubber fragments, they can be multiple colors. You'll know that it's rubber because it's quite stretchy and, for lack of a better word, quite rubbery. When it comes to processed lumber items, you might see cardboard cartons. So these can be large items such as a cardboard box or small items such as a cigarette box. Paper and cardboard, which could be paper brochures or cardboard coffee cup sleeves. Paper bags, and lumber or building material. Now this we also saw quite a bit of, and they are quite varied in what they look like and how large they are. I wanted to include fireworks as an other processed lumber material because it's somewhat unexpected. We consider fireworks lumber since the packaging is made from cardboard. When it comes to clothing and fabric items, you might see clothing and shoes, cloth masks, cloth gloves, so non-rubber gloves, towels and rags, cloth rope or net pieces, and fabric pieces. So fabric pieces were also common in some of our sites. These are long strips of fabric, often found in clumps in multiple colors. I want to just return to the cloth, rope, and net materials. Rope and net materials can either be made of cloth or plastic. So if you see a rope or net item, give it a touch. You should be able to determine by touching it whether it's made of plastic or whether it's made of cloth. I also wanted to include this other item. It's a pillow and would be classified under other cloth or fabric items. Okay, now you may find items that you know what it's made of, but it doesn't fit easily into one of the pre-made categories. If this is the case, you would add it in this section under unclassifiable or other. For example, if you find a piece of asphalt, what our roads are made of, you would complete the data sheet as shown here. This item is made of both metal and leather, so I would include it in unclassifiable as shown here. You might also encounter large items. So these are items that are larger than 1/3 of a meter. That's about the length of your forearm. If you see these large items, you want to record it in the large debris items section of your datasheet. So for example, if you see this, I'd say it's a carpet, and I would fill in the datasheet as shown here. You'll note the item type, carpet, the status, stranded, sunken, or buried. So since this is on the surface of the sand, we consider it stranded. Its approximate width, 1/2 meter, and approximate length, 1.5 meters. And then if you take a photograph of it, either record the number of photos that you've taken of it or the specific photo file number. If you find an item like this, I would record it in the large debris items as shown here. So this is some sort of foam packaging. I called it foam blocks, listed it as stranded with approximate width and length of 0.75 meters. If you take 2 photographs of it, you would list both of the photo numbers here. It's important when you're classifying these unclassifiable or large items that you're consistent within your team. So if you're finding items like this, make sure to stop, talk to your other teammates who are out in the field with you, and agree on a way to describe these items. This will ensure that your data is consistent. Okay, returning to our protocol. Once you've recorded the large items on the back of your data sheet, you'll want to return to the top section of your data sheet. Now, this is the job of the site lead. You'll want to select yes, that you saw large items, take photographs of them, and then provide a brief description of each item that you found. Usually we only see 1 or 2 large objects, and so you'd write it here. At this point, you've done most of the hard work. Simply record the ending time at the top of your data sheet, and you're almost done. Before leaving your field site, you want to ensure that you have all of your important data as well as your materials. We have created a leaving checklist to ensure that nothing is left behind. Once you've returned to where you're staying, you can total the number of items you found. So this means quantifying and recording the total number of each item. For plastic fragments, total each type of fragment. So 8 hard fragments, 2 foam fragments, and 3 film fragments. For the rest of the rows, total them on the side. You'll want to do this for every data sheet that you have, front and back. Once you return to where you're staying, you'll need to back up your data. This means taking photographs of all of your data sheets, front and back, and then downloading all of the photos of both your data sheets and your photos from the field of your transect and large items onto a computer. We recommend that you create one folder for each day that you spent in the field. Within that folder, create one folder for each site that you visited. In each folder for your site, place your photos in the listed folders. So one for your transect, large items in another folder, any miscellaneous photos from just working, and then one folder for your data sheets. Once you've completed putting all of your photos onto your computer, you want to back up your photos to an additional USB or external hard drive. As I mentioned earlier, the data sheets are the most important part of this work, so we want to have multiple copies of them saved in multiple places in case something gets lost or damaged. That's all. I just want to share a couple of tips from my experience in the field that I think would be helpful for you as you head into the field to conduct these debris surveys. First of all, check your leaving checklist before leaving your site. Oftentimes we get really excited about being finished with a site that we leave important materials behind. This is why we've created the leaving checklist, to make sure that you haven't forgotten to record any important data or any important materials. Write clearly. As I've said many times, the data sheets are really important, and the data is only valuable if we're able to read it. When writing in your data sheets, try to write in capitals as opposed to lowercase, and use clear tally marks. So here's an example of 2 ways of tallying your debris items that are very clear. You can either use 4 hatch marks and 1 across for the 5, or draw squares with a slash through them to indicate 5 items. Anything that you think is interesting or noteworthy can be written on the back of your data sheet. This can include things like, there was an emergency, so we had to leave our site early. This could include any wildlife that you encounter. If it begins to rain or be very windy while you're doing this work, anything that you think is either interesting or could affect the quality or your data itself should be written on the back of your data sheet. And of course, download all of your photos at the end of the day. This includes backups to a USB or external hard drive, and I recommend renaming your files. That way you've organized them the day that you return home so that you're not trying to sort through a big mess of photographs at the end of your field season. With that, I want to say thank you very much for listening. You can take a pause now, and in just a second, I'm going to be going through some benchmarking. Our contact information is listed here if you have any questions about our protocol or want to get in touch with us. Alrighty, so I'm going to go through a couple of examples of items that you might encounter while you're in the field. What I'm going to do is show you a photograph, as you can see here. You can pause the video, choose which item you think it is between A, B, C, or D, and then I'll go over the answers directly afterwards. Okay, so how would you classify these items? We would classify this item as a plastic bag. As I mentioned, plastic bags often get sand or mud put inside of them, and they become fully or partially buried in the sand or mud. When you see a clump of plastic bags like this, it's worthwhile to kind of pick through it to try and count the precise number of bags that might be found in a particular area. How would you classify this item? So we would classify this item as a large item. Despite the fact that it is plastic rope and net, this item is longer than 1/3 of a meter, so longer than my forearm. As a result, we would classify this as a large item, and we would record what we found in the large debris item section of the data sheet. How would you classify this item? Okay. We would call this item a plastic film fragment. As you can see, it looks like this item came from something like a plastic bag. If I were to touch it, it would be quite thin, flexible, and perhaps a little bit stretchy. That's why we call it a film fragment rather than a food wrapper or a bag. We don't call it a food wrapper or a bag because we also can't tell that it's a food wrapper or a bag. Remember that fragments are items that have been broken down so much that you're no longer able to figure out what item they previously belonged to. How would you classify this item? Okay, we would call this item a rice bag. Now, as I mentioned, rice bags are quite common in our sites. Sometimes they can be well formed like this one, and sometimes they can be shredded into sort of strips of plastic. How would you classify this item? Okay, we would call this one a jug and other containers. So this one can often be confused. Some people would call this a beverage bottle or a food wrapper, since we know that it used to contain food. For food wrappers, We want to stick to only the items that are made of that sort of aluminum plasticky wrapper. So think about ramen noodles or granola bars or sachets for condiments like soy sauce or ketchup or anything like that. Beverage bottles are only for beverages. So this looks like it contained a jelly. So we would call this one a jug and other food container. How would you classify this item? Okay, we would call this item a food wrapper. So as you can see, it probably came from some sort of packaged dry noodles or something like that. If you were to touch this, it would be quite flexible and perhaps a little bit stretchy as well. How would you classify this item? So we would call this one a fishing lure and line. So this one could be confused with plastic rope and net pieces. The difference between plastic rope and fishing lines is that fishing lines tend to be single filaments, whereas plastic rope tends to be multiple filaments that are spun together to make a thicker rope. The nets are usually quite large and you can see the net shape. Plastic rope and nets, as well as fishing lures and lines, can come in different colors. Sometimes we see them in this clear color, and sometimes we see them in a bluey green color as well, for both rope and nets, as well as fishing line and lures. How would you classify this item? Okay, so we would call this item a personal care product. As I mentioned, most personal care products are items that you might use in your bathroom. This includes syringes. If you do see a syringe while you're doing your survey, be careful not to step on it and report it to your local officials so that it can be disposed of safely. How would you classify this item? Okay, we would call this item a plastic rope and net. So as I mentioned earlier, plastic rope is defined as rope because it's lots of filaments spun together. And you can see along here that it's been spun together to make a thicker rope. This is not fishing lures and line because fishing lures and line are a single filament. And the only way to know that this is a plastic rope and net rather than a cloth rope and net would be to touch it. Next item, how would you classify this item? Okay, we would call this item a hard plastic fragment. Recall that fragments are items that have been broken down so much that they're unrecognizable. This fragment, if you touched it, would be hard, inflexible, and the edges would likely be quite jagged. Hard plastic fragments especially come in a huge diversity of colors. Okay, how would you classify this item? All right, so we would classify this item as a foam fragment. Foam fragments usually come from styrofoam, and so they're very, very light to the touch and not very dense. Both this yellow item here, as well as this white item here, we would classify as foam fragments. The reason why we call them fragments is because we don't know what item they could have previously belonged to. It could be a cooler, it could be a container, it could be a ball, it could be a cup. We don't really know. Okay, how would you classify this item? Okay, We would call these items fabric pieces. So fabric pieces, as I mentioned, are long strips of fabric. They're often found in bundles with multiple colors. These are probably offcuts from textile or clothing manufacturers. So if you see them in clumps and there's long pieces of fabric, we would call them fabric pieces. Okay, how would you classify these items? We would call these items clothing and shoes. So these are very clearly items of clothing. We wouldn't call them cloth or fabric because they are clearly items of clothing as opposed to just pieces of fabric. They're certainly not shoes, and we can tell that they're clothing, so they're not towels or rags. How would you classify these items, the blue ones? All right, we would call these items flip-flops. So flip-flops are made of rubber. They can be a variety of colors. We would not call these shoes because flip-flops are a specific type of shoe. If you saw another type of shoe, like a running shoe, it would go under clothing and shoes. However, if you saw a rubber boot, like a rain boot, that would go under rubber other. How would you classify these items? Okay, we would call these items ceramic pieces. So these could be confused for hard plastic fragments or glass fragments. The ceramic pieces are that sort of white porcelain type of material. So that is what would differentiate them from a glass fragment. The reason that they're not hard plastic fragments is you would need to touch them to determine. So the hard plastic fragments are going to be plastic, they're going to be lighter. The ceramic pieces are going to be made of ceramic or porcelain, and so they'll be heavier. Generally, you can tell the difference between plastic or ceramic. Okay, how would you classify this item? And I'm talking about this image right here in the front. Okay, so we would call this item a jug and other container. So these items could be confused for food wrappers or beverage bottles. The reason why they're not food wrappers is because they're not that really flexible wrapping that we see on, for example, ramen noodles. The reason why this is a jug and container and not a beverage bottle is because the beverage bottles are made of that sort of 100% plastic. These Tetra Paks have layers of plastic and cardboard, and so we would classify them under jugs and containers rather than beverage bottles. Okay, this is our last item here. How would you classify it? Alrighty, time's up. We would classify this one as a personal care product. So this is a roll-on deodorant. Remember I said that personal care products are often products we use in our bathrooms, and so this would be under personal care. Personal care products are very diverse. You can have razors, combs, hairbrushes, toothbrushes, deodorant, anything like that. Syringes, menstrual products, etc. So hopefully you found that benchmarking useful. I also want to note that there are more photographs of items on the NOAA website. This has a huge variety of photos, so if you want to familiarize yourself more with debris items, I encourage you to visit that website. With that, I want to say thank you very much for your time. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, Rachel, or my PhD supervisor, Dr. Chelsea Brockman. Thank you very much.